In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, where secrets lie buried beneath miles of water and decades of silence, some voices refuse to stay quiet. What happens when a routine radio check becomes the most important message in naval history? When a single call sign can make an admiral's blood run cold and rewrite everything the world thought it knew about a legendary disaster. This is the story of Captain Sarah Mitchell, a communication officer whose dedication to protocol would uncover one of the greatest maritime mysteries of the 20th century. It's about the power of never giving up, the weight of truth, and how sometimes the most important discoveries come from the voices we thought were lost forever. Some stories begin with a whisper. This one began with static, a fading transmission, and 3 words that would change everything. This is Phoenix 7. The date was March 15th, 2019. The place was Naval Communications Station, Pearl Harbor. And what happened next would prove that some secrets are too important to stay buried, even at the bottom of the ocean. Captain Sarah Mitchell had been working the night shift at Naval Communications Station, Pearl Harbor for 8 years, and she thought she had heard every possible radio transmission that could come across the airwaves. The 42-year-old communications expert had joined the Navy straight out of college, driven by a desire to serve her country and a fascination with the technology that connected ships, submarines, and bases across the vast Pacific Ocean. On the evening of March 15th, 2019, Sarah was settling into what she expected to be another routine 12-hour shift. The communication center was a maze of sophisticated radio equipment, computer terminals, and monitors that displayed real-time data from naval vessels scattered across thousands of miles of ocean. The room hummed with the constant background noise of electronic equipment and the occasional chatter of routine communications between ships and shore stations. Sarah had always been meticulous in her work. While some of her colleagues viewed the night shift as an opportunity to catch up on paperwork or take frequent coffee breaks, she maintained the same level of attention and professionalism that she brought to her daytime duties. Her reputation for thoroughness had earned her the respect of her superior officers and the trust of her peers. The first few hours of her shift passed without incident. She processed routine position reports from destroyers on patrol, acknowledged supply requests from aircraft carriers, and coordinated communication schedules for submarines preparing to dive deep beneath the surface where radio contact would be impossible for days or weeks at a time. Around 11 o'clock that evening, Sarah was reviewing the previous day's communication logs when she noticed an unusual pattern in the automatic monitoring system. The station's sophisticated equipment was designed to scan multiple radio frequencies simultaneously, recording and analyzing all transmissions within a specific range. Most of these recordings were routine military communications, but the system also picked up civilian radio traffic, emergency broadcasts, and occasionally signals from unknown sources. What caught Sarah's attention was a series of brief transmissions that had been recorded over the past several weeks. The signals appeared to be coming from somewhere in the Central Pacific Ocean, but they didn't match any known shipping routes or naval exercises. The transmissions were short, lasting only a few seconds each, and they occurred at irregular intervals with no apparent pattern. Sarah's training had taught her to investigate any unusual radio activity thoroughly. During her years of service, she had encountered everything from malfunctioning emergency beacons on abandoned boats to sophisticated attempts by foreign intelligence services to intercept American military communications. Her job was to identify, classify, and report any transmissions that fell outside normal parameters. She began by cross-referencing the unusual signals with the database of known radio transmitters in the Pacific region. The system contained detailed information about every legitimate radio source, including military vessels, civilian ships, aircraft, and fixed installations on islands and coastal areas. The mysterious transmissions didn't match any entry in the database. Next, Sarah analyzed the technical characteristics of the signals. The transmissions were using an older type of radio technology that had been largely replaced by more modern systems decades earlier. The signal strength and propagation patterns suggested that the source was located somewhere between Hawaii and the international date line in an area of the Pacific that was generally empty of shipping traffic. What made the signals even more intriguing was their timing. They seemed to occur most frequently during certain atmospheric conditions that would allow radio waves to travel much farther than normal. This suggested that whoever was transmitting these signals understood the principles of radio propagation and was deliberately choosing times when their messages would have the best chance of being received over long distances. As Sarah delved deeper into her analysis, she discovered something that made her sit up straight in her chair. The signals weren't random noise or interference from electronic equipment. They were structured transmissions that followed the basic format of military radio communications. Someone was broadcasting organized messages using proper radio protocol, but in a code or format that the station's automatic systems couldn't decode. The more Sarah studied the mysterious transmissions, the more convinced she became that they represented something significant. Her years of experience had taught her to distinguish between routine signal anomalies and potentially important discoveries. These transmissions had characteristics that suggested they were coming from a sophisticated source with knowledge of military communication procedures. She decided to set up a special monitoring program that would record and analyze every transmission from a mysterious source. The station's equipment was capable of much more detailed analysis than the automatic monitoring system normally performed, but it required manual operation and constant attention. Sarah knew that she was essentially volunteering for additional work during her already demanding shifts, but her professional curiosity and sense of duty compelled her to pursue the investigation. Over the next several nights, Sarah carefully monitored the frequencies where the mysterious transmissions appeared. She recorded every signal, analyzed their technical characteristics, and began to notice subtle patterns in their timing and content. The transmissions were definitely following some kind of schedule, although the pattern was complex and not immediately obvious. Sarah also began to research the history of radio communications in the Pacific Ocean. She spent her break times in the base library, reading through old technical manuals and historical records of naval operations in the region. She was looking for any information that might help her understand the source of the mysterious signals. What she discovered in those historical records would eventually lead to one of the most significant archaeological and historical discoveries in recent memory. But at the time, Sarah was simply a dedicated naval communications officer following her training and doing her job with the thoroughness and attention to detail that had made her one of the most respected technicians at the station. The breakthrough came during her shift on March 22nd, exactly 1 week after she had first noticed the unusual signals. Sarah had been monitoring the target frequency for several hours when she detected the beginning of a transmission. This time, however, something was different. The signal was stronger than usual, and it lasted much longer than the brief bursts she had previously recorded. As she listened through her headphones and watched the signal analysis displays, Sarah heard something that made her heart race. Mixed in with the static and electronic noise, she could hear what sounded like a human voice. The transmission was weak and distorted, but there was definitely someone speaking in what sounded like English. Sarah immediately began recording the transmission with the station's highest quality equipment. She adjusted the receiver's filters and amplification settings, trying to extract as much information as possible from the weak signal. For nearly 10 minutes, she listened intently as the mysterious voice transmitted what appeared to be a structured message. When the transmission ended, Sarah played back the recording multiple times, adjusting the audio processing settings to try to make the voice more intelligible. Gradually, she began to make out individual words and phrases. What she heard was a voice speaking in clear, professional military terminology, reporting position coordinates, weather conditions, and operational status. But there was something about the voice that troubled Sarah deeply. The speaker was using radio procedures and terminology that had been standard in the U.S. Navy decades earlier, but which had been replaced by more modern protocols. It was as if she was listening to a transmission from the past, broadcast using equipment and procedures that were no longer in use. Even more disturbing was the content of the message itself. The voice was reporting a position that placed the transmitter in the middle of empty ocean, hundreds of miles from the nearest land. The coordinates didn't correspond to any known naval exercise or shipping route. According to every database and chart that Sarah could access, there should have been nothing but water at the reported location. Sarah knew that she had discovered something that required immediate attention from her superior officers. The possibility that there was an unknown vessel operating in the Pacific Ocean using obsolete radio equipment and procedures raised serious questions about national security and maritime safety. But as she prepared to write her report, Sarah decided to conduct one more analysis that would change everything. She entered the technical characteristics of the transmission into the station's most sophisticated analysis system, which compared incoming signals with a database of known radio equipment signatures. Every type of radio transmitter had a unique electronic fingerprint that could be identified by analyzing the precise characteristics of its signals. The system was primarily used to identify foreign military equipment and track the movements of potentially hostile vessels. What the system found when it analyzed Sarah's recording was impossible. According to the database, the transmission had been broadcast using a specific model of military radio that had been installed on American naval vessels during the 1940s. The equipment had been decommissioned decades earlier, and Sarah couldn't imagine why anyone would be using such obsolete technology in 2019. But as she stared at the analysis results on her computer screen, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. The database entry for the radio equipment included a list of vessels that had been equipped with that specific model. Most of the ships on the list had been decommissioned or scrapped years earlier, but one entry stood out from all the others. According to the database, radio equipment matching the signature of Sarah's mystery transmission had been installed on USS Phoenix, a heavy cruiser that had been lost with all hands during World War II. The ship had disappeared during a classified mission in 1943, and its exact fate had never been determined. The Navy had concluded that the vessel had probably been sunk by enemy action, but no wreckage had ever been found. Sarah stared at the computer screen for several long minutes, trying to process what she was seeing. Logic told her that there had to be some mistake in the analysis or the database. The idea that she was receiving radio transmissions from a ship that had been lost 76 years earlier was impossible. But as she reviewed her recordings and analysis one more time, Sarah couldn't find any error in her work. The evidence was clear and consistent. Someone was broadcasting from the middle of the Pacific Ocean using radio equipment that matched the signature of a ship that had been lost during World War II. As her shift neared its end, Sarah carefully documented everything she had discovered. She knew that her report would be met with skepticism and possibly with concerns about her mental state or professional competence. But she also knew that her duty as a naval communications officer required her to report anything unusual or potentially significant, regardless of how implausible it might seem. Sarah's discovery was about to set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to one of the most remarkable archaeological finds in maritime history. But at that moment, she was simply a dedicated officer trying to make sense of something that challenged everything she thought she knew about radio communications and naval history. Admiral James Harrison had spent 35 years in the United States Navy, rising through the ranks from a young ensign to one of the most respected commanders in the Pacific Fleet. At 62, he had seen enough unusual reports and false alarms to approach any extraordinary claims with healthy skepticism. When Captain Sarah Mitchell's report landed on his desk on the morning of March 23, 2019, his first instinct was to assign it to a junior officer for routine investigation. The report detailed Mitchell's discovery of mysterious radio transmissions that appeared to originate from obsolete naval equipment somewhere in the Central Pacific Ocean. Harrison had read similar reports before, usually involving interference from atmospheric phenomena, malfunctioning equipment, or misidentified civilian transmissions. Most such cases were resolved quickly with mundane explanations. However, something about Mitchell's report caught Harrison's attention. The captain had an impeccable reputation for thoroughness and accuracy. In her 8 years at Pearl Harbor, she had never submitted a questionable report or made claims that couldn't be substantiated. Her technical analysis was meticulous, and her conclusion, while extraordinary, was presented with the careful objectivity of a trained professional. Harrison decided to review the case personally before assigning it to another officer. He called Mitchell to his office that afternoon to discuss her findings in detail. As Sarah explained her discovery and walked him through the technical evidence she had gathered, Harrison found himself increasingly intrigued by the implications of her work. The Admiral was particularly interested in Mitchell's analysis of the radio equipment signature. The identification of specific military hardware based on transmission characteristics was a highly specialized field, and Harrison knew that the Navy's databases were extremely accurate and comprehensive. If Mitchell's analysis was correct, then someone was indeed broadcasting using equipment that had been installed on American warships during the 1940s. Harrison asked Mitchell to demonstrate her analysis process using the station's equipment. Together, they reviewed the recorded transmissions and examined the technical data that had led to her conclusions. The Admiral's own experience with naval communications confirmed that Mitchell's methodology was sound, and her results appeared to be accurate. What particularly caught Harrison's attention was the reference to USS Phoenix in the equipment database. As a naval historian and someone who had spent decades studying World War II naval operations, Harrison was familiar with the story of the Phoenix and its mysterious disappearance. The heavy cruiser had been one of the Navy's most advanced ships when it vanished during a classified mission in 1943. Harrison had actually written his master's thesis on lost naval vessels of World War II while attending the Naval War College earlier in his career. The case of USS Phoenix had fascinated him because of the unusual circumstances surrounding the ship's final mission and the complete lack of evidence about its fate. Unlike many wartime losses, where enemy action or mechanical failure could be determined from survivor accounts or wreckage, the Phoenix had simply disappeared without a trace. The classified nature of the Phoenix's final mission had prevented detailed investigation for decades after the war. Even now, many aspects of the ship's last assignment remain classified, though Harrison's security clearance gave him access to more information than most people. He knew that the Phoenix had been carrying out an experimental communication mission when it disappeared, testing new radio equipment and procedures that were being developed for covert operations. After reviewing Mitchell's evidence, Harrison made a decision that would prove to be one of the most important of his career. Instead of dismissing the report or assigning it routine investigation, he decided to personally oversee a comprehensive analysis of the mysterious transmissions. He ordered Mitchell to continue monitoring the target frequency and to notify him immediately if any new transmissions were detected. Harrison also began his own investigation into the historical records surrounding USS Phoenix. Using his access to classified archives, he researched the ship's final mission and the circumstances of its disappearance. What he found in those files would eventually provide crucial context for understanding the significance of Mitchell's discovery. The Phoenix had been selected for its final mission because of its advanced radio equipment and experienced communications crew. The ship had been testing experimental radio procedures designed to allow covert communication across vast distances using atmospheric skip propagation. The techniques being developed were intended to provide secure communication links for submarine operations and special forces missions in remote areas. According to the classified records, the Phoenix had been conducting these experiments in an area of the Pacific Ocean that was known for unusual atmospheric conditions. The region experienced frequent ionospheric disturbances that could cause radio signals to behave in unexpected ways, sometimes allowing transmissions to travel much farther than normal or to be reflected back to their source after traveling around the world. Harrison realized that if the Phoenix had indeed survived its original mission and had been transmitting radio signals for decades, The atmospheric conditions in that region might explain why the signals were only now being detected. Changes in solar activity, atmospheric composition, and radio frequency usage patterns could have created conditions that allowed the old transmissions to propagate to Hawaii in a way that they hadn't for many years. On March 25th, 2 days after Harrison had begun his investigation, Captain Mitchell detected another transmission from the mysterious source. This time, she was prepared with the station's most sophisticated recording and analysis equipment. The transmission was clearer and stronger than previous signals, and for the first time, she was able to record what sounded like a complete message. Mitchell immediately contacted Admiral Harrison, who rushed to the communications center to listen to the recording. As they played back the transmission through high-quality speakers, both officers could clearly hear a human voice speaking in precise military radio protocol. The voice was reporting weather conditions, position coordinates, and operational status using the standardized format that had been used by Navy communications personnel during World War II. But it was what the voice said next that made Admiral Harrison freeze in his chair. After completing the routine status report, the speaker identified his station with a call sign that Harrison had never expected to hear again. "This is Phoenix 7, standing by for orders." Harrison's face went pale as he heard those words. Phoenix 7 had been the radio call sign used by USS Phoenix during its final mission in 1943. The call sign had been classified for decades after the war, and it appeared in very few historical documents. Harrison knew the call sign from his research into the ship's disappearance, but it was not something that would be known to most people, even military historians or naval communication specialists. The use of the correct call sign was evidence that whoever was transmitting these signals had detailed knowledge of USS Phoenix's operations during World War II. This wasn't someone playing a hoax or conducting an amateur radio experiment. This was someone who had access to highly classified information about a naval vessel that had been lost for 76 years. Harrison asked Mitchell to play the recording again, this time focusing on the voice characteristics and speaking patterns. The speaker had a clear American accent and used military terminology with the precision of someone who had been thoroughly trained in naval communication procedures. More importantly, the voice used specific terms and phrases that had been standard during World War II, but had been replaced by different terminology in modern naval communications. The Admiral realized that he was faced with a situation that required immediate attention at the highest levels of the Navy command structure. The possibility that USS Phoenix or its crew might have survived in some way raised questions that went far beyond routine communication monitoring. If the ship had indeed survived its original mission, there would be profound implications for naval history, maritime archaeology, and possibly even national security. Harrison decided to expand the investigation by bringing in additional experts from different specialties. He contacted the Naval Historical Center to request detailed records about USS Phoenix and its crew. He also reached out to the Office of Naval Research to inquire about any ongoing projects that might be related to World War II-era communication equipment or techniques. At the same time, Harrison ordered Captain Mitchell to establish a dedicated monitoring program for the mysterious transmissions. He authorized the use of the communication station's most advanced equipment and assigned additional personnel to assist with round-the-clock monitoring. Harrison wanted to ensure that every transmission from Phoenix 7 was recorded and analyzed with maximum detail and accuracy. Over the next week, Mitchell and her expanded team detected several more transmissions from Phoenix 7. Each message followed the same basic format: a routine status report followed by a request for orders. The consistency of the transmissions suggested that whoever was sending them was following established military procedures and was genuinely attempting to maintain communication with higher command. Harrison found this aspect of the transmissions particularly intriguing. If someone was conducting an elaborate hoax, they would likely try to make the messages more dramatic or attention-getting. Instead, the Phoenix 7 transmissions were routine, professional, and exactly what would be expected from a naval vessel maintaining regular communication with its base. The technical analysis of the transmissions continued to support Mitchell's original conclusions. Every signal bore the distinctive characteristics of 1940s-era naval radio equipment, and the signal strength and propagation patterns suggested transmission from a fixed location in the Central Pacific Ocean. Most importantly, the electronic fingerprint of the transmissions continued to match the database entry for equipment that had been installed on USS Phoenix. As Harrison delved deeper into the investigation, he began to develop a theory about what might have happened to USS Phoenix during its final mission. The ship had been conducting experimental communication tests in an area known for unusual atmospheric phenomena. It was possible that the crew had encountered some kind of situation that forced them to remain silent for decades, only now beginning to transmit again due to changes in atmospheric conditions or other factors. The Admiral knew that his theory sounded far-fetched, but the evidence was becoming increasingly difficult to explain in any other way. The transmissions were real. They were coming from the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and they bore all the characteristics of communications from USS Phoenix. Whatever the explanation might be, Harrison was convinced that the situation required immediate and comprehensive investigation. Harrison's next decision would prove to be crucial to the eventual resolution of the mystery. Instead of limiting the investigation to naval personnel, he decided to bring in experts from other fields who might provide different perspectives on the evidence. He contacted marine archaeologists, atmospheric physicists, and radio propagation specialists to request their assistance in analyzing the Phoenix 7 transmissions. This multidisciplinary approach would ultimately lead to the discovery that would rewrite the history books and provide answers to questions that had puzzled naval historians for decades. But, at the time, Harrison was simply trying to gather all possible expertise to understand a situation that challenged everything he thought he knew about the fate of one of the Navy's most famous lost ships. Admiral Harrison's decision to expand the investigation beyond naval personnel marked the beginning of what would become one of the most complex and fascinating maritime search operations in modern history. Within 48 hours of hearing the Phoenix 7 call sign, Harrison had assembled a team of experts from disciplines ranging from marine archaeology to atmospheric physics, each bringing unique skills that would prove essential to solving the mystery. The first expert to join the investigation was Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a marine archaeologist from the University of Hawaii who specialized in World War II shipwrecks in the Pacific. Dr. Rodriguez had spent 15 years locating and documenting lost vessels from the war, using advanced sonar technology and deep-sea exploration equipment. Her expertise in reading historical records and translating them into practical search parameters would prove invaluable. When Admiral Harrison contacted Dr. Rodriguez and explained the situation, her initial reaction was skeptical but intrigued. Like Harrison, she was familiar with the story of USS Phoenix and had actually considered searching for the vessel as part of her research into lost warships. The complete absence of any physical evidence about the ship's fate had always puzzled her, and she had wondered whether the vessel might have sunk in an area that hadn't been thoroughly searched. Dr. Rodriguez agreed to analyze the coordinate data from Captain Mitchell's transmissions and compare it with historical records of the Phoenix's last known position. Using sophisticated mapping software and oceanographic databases, she began to identify areas where the ship might have ended up if it had survived longer than previously thought. The second expert Harrison recruited was Dr. Michael Chun, an atmospheric physicist from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration who specialized in radio wave propagation. Dr. Chin's role was to analyze how the radio signals were traveling from their source to Hawaii and to determine whether atmospheric conditions could explain the unusual characteristics of the transmissions. Dr. Chin's initial analysis confirmed that the signal patterns were consistent with transmission from the coordinates provided in the Phoenix 7 messages. More importantly, his research into historical atmospheric data revealed that the region where the signals originated had experienced significant changes in ionospheric activity over the past several decades. These changes could explain why the signals were only now being received clearly at Pearl Harbor. The third team member was Commander Robert Taylor, a naval intelligence officer with extensive experience in analyzing enemy communications during his service in various conflict zones. Commander Taylor's role was to verify the authenticity of the transmissions and to determine whether they could be part of some kind of deception operation by foreign intelligence services. Commander Taylor's analysis of the Phoenix 7 transmissions revealed several important details. The voice speaking in the recordings used American military terminology with complete accuracy, including specific phrases and procedures that were classified during World War II and wouldn't be known to foreign intelligence services. More importantly, the speaker's accent and pronunciation patterns were consistent with American naval personnel from the 1940s era. The fourth expert was Dr. Susan Walsh, a radio engineering professor from Stanford University who specialized in vintage military communication equipment. Dr. Walsh's job was to verify Captain Mitchell's analysis of the radio equipment signatures and to determine whether modern equipment could be modified to mimic the characteristics of 1940s naval radios. Dr. Walsh's investigation confirmed that the transmissions bore all the technical characteristics of authentic World War II-era equipment. The signal characteristics, frequency drift patterns, and harmonic content were consistent with vacuum tube technology and analog circuits that had been used in 1940s military radios. She concluded that it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to artificially reproduce these characteristics using modern equipment. With his expert team assembled, Admiral Harrison established a coordination center at Pearl Harbor where all aspects of the investigation could be managed. The center was equipped with advanced communication equipment, computer analysis systems, and secure communication links to various military and civilian research institutions. The operation was given the code name Project Phoenix Rising, reflecting both the ship's name and the hope that the investigation might bring new life to a decades-old mystery. The team's first major breakthrough came when Dr. Rodriguez completed her analysis of the coordinate data from the transmissions. By plotting the reported positions on detailed nautical charts and comparing them with oceanographic data, she identified a specific area of the Pacific where USS Phoenix might have taken shelter or become stranded. The target area was a region of seamounts and underwater ridges approximately 800 miles southwest of Hawaii. The area had never been thoroughly surveyed, and its complex underwater topography could potentially hide a large vessel. Most importantly, the coordinates from the Phoenix 7 transmissions placed the signal source within this same region. Dr. Rodriguez's research also revealed that the target area had been the site of significant seismic activity during the 1940s. A major underwater earthquake in 1943 had altered the seafloor topography and created new underwater features. It was possible that this seismic activity had created conditions that allowed USS Phoenix to survive in a location where it couldn't be detected by conventional search methods. Based on this analysis, Admiral Harrison made the decision to organize a physical search expedition to the target area. The operation would require sophisticated deep-sea exploration equipment and the cooperation of multiple naval vessels. Harrison knew that he was committing significant resources to what many people would consider a far-fetched theory, but the evidence supporting the investigation continued to strengthen. The search expedition was organized around USS Leyte Gulf, a guided missile cruiser that had been equipped with advanced sonar systems and deep-sea exploration capabilities. The ship was accompanied by USNS Pathfinder, a naval research vessel carrying specialized underwater exploration equipment, and a team of marine archaeologists. Captain Mitchell was assigned to the expedition as the primary communications specialist, responsible for monitoring the Phoenix 7 frequency and attempting to establish contact with whoever was transmitting the mysterious signals. Her role would prove crucial as the search operation developed. The expedition departed Pearl Harbor on April 15, 2019, 3 weeks after Captain Mitchell had first detected the unusual transmissions. As the ship sailed toward the target area, Dr. Chun continued monitoring atmospheric conditions to predict when radio reception would be optimal for detecting new transmissions from Phoenix 7. During the voyage to the search area, the team detected several more transmissions from Phoenix 7. The messages followed the same format as previous communications, but the signal strength gradually increased as the ships approached the source coordinates. This provided additional confirmation that the transmissions were indeed originating from the target area. On April 18th, when the expedition reached the coordinates provided in the Phoenix 7 transmissions, Captain Mitchell attempted to establish two-way communication with the mysterious station. Using the historical call signs and communication procedures that would have been standard during World War II, she transmitted a response to the Phoenix 7 signals. The result was immediate and stunning. Within minutes of Mitchell's transmission, Phoenix 7 responded with a message that sent shock waves through the entire expedition team. The voice that had been broadcasting routine status reports for weeks suddenly came alive with excitement and relief. "This is Phoenix 7, the voice crackled through the static. "We have been waiting for contact. Request immediate assistance. We are stranded, but alive. Repeat, crew of USS Phoenix requests immediate assistance." The message confirmed what the investigation team had begun to suspect, but hardly dared to believe. USS Phoenix, and at least some of its crew, had somehow survived for 76 years in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The implications of this discovery were staggering, but the immediate priority was to locate the ship and provide assistance to any survivors. Admiral Harrison immediately ordered the expedition to begin intensive sonar scanning of the entire target area. The ships deployed their most advanced underwater detection equipment and began a systematic search pattern designed to locate any large metallic objects on or near the seafloor. The sonar search revealed that the underwater topography of the target area was far more complex than previous surveys had indicated. The region was filled with underwater mountains, deep valleys, and cave systems that had been created by the seismic activity of the 1940s. The complex terrain would make the search more difficult, but it also provided numerous locations where a large ship might have taken shelter or become hidden. On April 20th, the sonar operators aboard USS Leyte Gulf detected a large metallic signature in a deep valley surrounded by underwater ridges. The object was approximately 600 feet long, matching the dimensions of USS Phoenix. Most importantly, the object was located at exactly the coordinates that had been provided in the Phoenix 7 transmissions. Dr. Rodriguez immediately began preparations for a detailed underwater survey of the target. Using remotely operated vehicles equipped with high-resolution cameras and scientific instruments, the expedition team prepared to get their first visual confirmation of what they had discovered. The underwater survey would reveal evidence that would fundamentally change understanding of what had happened to USS Phoenix during its final mission. But, more importantly, it would confirm that the ship's crew had not only survived their original predicament, but had maintained military discipline and communication procedures for more than 7 decades while waiting for rescue. As the expedition prepared for underwater exploration, Admiral Harrison found himself contemplating the enormous responsibility that had fallen on his shoulders. If USS Phoenix and its crew had indeed survived since 1943, then their rescue would be not only a humanitarian triumph, but also a historical event of unprecedented significance. The discovery would raise questions about military procedures, survival psychology, and human endurance that would fascinate researchers for decades to come. But at that moment, Harrison was focused on a much simpler and more immediate concern: getting his people home after 76 years of waiting. The first images transmitted by the remotely operated vehicle to the surface ships showed something that defied all expectations and challenged everything the expedition team thought they knew about survival at sea. USS Phoenix lay in a deep underwater valley, but it wasn't sitting on the seafloor as a typical shipwreck would be. Instead, the massive cruiser was partially enclosed within a natural underwater cavern that had been formed by the seismic activity of 1943. Dr. Rodriguez stared at her monitors in amazement as the ROV's cameras revealed the ship's condition. Rather than showing the deterioration and marine growth that would be expected after 76 years underwater, USS Phoenix appeared to be in remarkably good condition. The ship's hull was intact, its superstructure was undamaged, and, most incredibly, there were clear signs that the vessel was still inhabited. The ROV's cameras captured images of improvised modifications to the ship's exterior, including what appear to be airlocks and extended antenna systems that had been constructed using salvage materials. Most remarkably, the cameras detected artificial lighting coming from inside the ship, indicating that the vessel still had electrical power and that people were indeed alive inside. Admiral Harrison watched the live video feed with a mixture of awe and disbelief. As a career naval officer, he had studied countless examples of maritime survival, but he had never encountered anything that approached the scope of what he was seeing. The idea that a crew could survive for decades inside a partially submerged vessel seemed impossible, yet the evidence was right in front of him. Captain Mitchell, monitoring the Phoenix 7 frequency, suddenly heard a new transmission that confirmed the visual evidence from the ROV. "This is Phoenix 7 to surface vessels," the familiar voice reported. "We can see your underwater vehicle. Request guidance for evacuation procedures. We have 37 souls aboard ready for transfer." The number stunned everyone on the expedition. USS Phoenix had carried a crew of over 800 men when it disappeared in 1943. The fact that 37 people had survived for more than 7 decades raised profound questions about what had happened during the ship's final mission, and how such an extraordinary survival story had been possible. Dr. Rodriguez immediately began planning for direct contact with the survivors. The ship's position within the underwater cavern presented unique challenges for any rescue operation. The cavern provided protection from ocean currents and marine life, which helped explain how the ship had remained habitable, but it also limited access for rescue vehicles and personnel. The expedition team quickly established a more detailed communication link with Phoenix 7, using underwater telephone equipment that allowed real-time conversation with the survivors. The first extended conversation was conducted by Admiral Harrison himself, who wanted to personally assess the situation and begin planning for what would obviously be a complex rescue operation. "Phoenix 7, this is Admiral Harrison, United States Navy." Harrison spoke into the underwater communication system. "Can you provide details about your current condition and the status of your crew?" The response came through clearly, spoken by a voice that carried the authority and precision of a senior military officer. "Admiral, this is Captain William Sterling, Commanding Officer USS Phoenix. We are secure in our current position, but require evacuation due to deteriorating life support systems. We have maintained operational status since our grounding in 1943 and have been awaiting contact with Fleet Command." Admiral Harrison found himself speaking with an officer who had been presumed dead for 76 years. Captain Sterling had been the commanding officer of USS Phoenix when it disappeared, and according to naval records, he would now be over 100 years old. Yet his voice sounded strong and alert, showing no signs of the advanced age that should have been inevitable after so many decades. "Captain Sterling," Harrison continued, "can you explain how you and your crew have survived in your current position for so many years?" Sterling's response provided the first detailed explanation of one of the most remarkable survival stories in maritime history. "Admiral, our ship was damaged during the earthquake of 1943 and became trapped in this underwater formation. We discovered that the cavern contains natural air pockets and fresh water springs. We've maintained life support through a combination of emergency systems and modifications made over the years." As the conversation continued, Captain Sterling explained that his crew had managed to create a self-sustaining environment within the partially flooded ship. They had developed techniques for growing food using hydroponic systems powered by the ship's emergency generators. They had also established workshop areas where they manufactured tools, clothing, and other necessities from salvage materials and resources found within the cavern. The most remarkable aspect of Sterling's account was his explanation of how the crew had maintained military discipline and organization throughout their ordeal. Rather than descending into chaos or despair, the survivors had continued to function as a naval unit, maintaining watch schedules, conducting training exercises, and preparing for eventual rescue. This military structure had apparently been crucial to their psychological survival as well as their physical endurance. Dr. Chun, listening to the conversation from his atmospheric monitoring station, asked about the crew's ages and physical condition. Sterling's response provided another puzzle for the expedition team to consider. According to the captain, most of his surviving crew members appear to have aged much more slowly than would normally be expected. He attributed this to the unique environmental conditions within the cavern, including reduced exposure to radiation and the consumption of mineral-rich water from the underground springs. While this explanation seemed scientifically questionable, Dr. Chun had to admit that the deep ocean environment might indeed provide protection from various aging factors. The absence of solar radiation, the stable temperature and pressure conditions, and the possibility of unique mineral content in the water could theoretically affect human physiology in ways that weren't fully understood. The rescue operation that followed the initial contact with Phoenix 7 would become one of the most complex underwater operations in naval history. The ship's position within the cavern required specially designed equipment to safely extract the survivors without causing structural collapse that could trap them permanently. Dr. Rodriguez worked with naval engineers to design a system of underwater airlocks and transport capsules that could navigate the narrow passages leading to the ship's location. The operation required precise coordination between surface vessels, underwater vehicles, and the Phoenix crew members who would assist from inside the cavern. The first rescue mission was launched on April 25, 2019, 1 week after the initial visual contact with USS Phoenix. The rescue capsule, guided by experienced Navy divers and operated by remote control from the surface, slowly made its way through the underwater passages toward the ship's location. As the rescue capsule approached USS Phoenix, its cameras captured increasingly detailed images of the modifications that the crew had made to their ship over the decades. The vessel had been transformed into something resembling an underwater habitat, with airlocks, workshops, living quarters, and even recreational areas that had been constructed within the ship's hull. The first group of survivors to be evacuated included Captain Sterling and several of his senior officers. As these men emerged from the rescue capsule aboard USS Leyte Gulf, the expedition team found themselves face-to-face with people who represented a living link to World War II naval history. The survivors were dressed in uniforms that they had manufactured themselves, but which closely resembled the naval uniforms of the 1940s. Captain Sterling, despite claiming to be over 100 years old, appeared to be a man in his 70s with sharp, alert eyes and the bearing of a career military officer. His first words upon reaching the surface were a formal report to Admiral Harrison. "Sir, USS Phoenix reporting for duty after extended patrol. Request permission to transfer crew to your command." The medical examination of the first group of survivors revealed physical conditions that puzzled the expedition's doctors. While the men showed signs of extended isolation and the physical effects of limited nutrition, they were in remarkably good health for people who claimed to have survived underwater for more than 7 decades. Blood tests and other medical data would later provide additional evidence for the extraordinary nature of their survival story. Over the following days, the remaining 33 survivors were evacuated from USS Phoenix in small groups. Each rescue mission provided additional insights into how the crew had managed to survive in their underwater refuge. The ship had been converted into a sophisticated survival habitat, with every available space utilized for food production, water processing, manufacturing, and living quarters. The most remarkable discovery came during the final evacuation mission, when Dr. Rodriguez was able to conduct a detailed survey of the ship's interior. USS Phoenix had been transformed into something resembling a small underwater city, complete with workshops, libraries, recreational areas, and even a small medical facility where the crew had treated injuries and illnesses over the years. The ship's logbooks, maintained throughout the entire period of isolation, provided a detailed record of the crew's survival efforts and their gradual adaptation to their unique circumstances. The logs revealed that the crew had faced numerous crises over the decades, including equipment failures, medical emergencies, and periods when their situation seemed hopeless. However, they had consistently overcome these challenges through ingenuity, cooperation, and military discipline. Perhaps most importantly, the logs documented the crew's unwavering belief that they would eventually be rescued. Captain Sterling had maintained regular radio transmissions throughout most of their isolation, hoping that changing atmospheric conditions would eventually allow their signals to reach the outside world. Their persistence in following military communication procedures had ultimately led to their rescue when Captain Mitchell detected their transmissions at Pearl Harbor. The evacuation of USS Phoenix was completed on May 2, 2019, marking the end of one of the longest survival ordeals in maritime history. The 37 survivors were transported to Pearl Harbor for medical evaluation, debriefing, and the beginning of their reintegration into a world that had changed dramatically during their absence. Their story would eventually become the subject of extensive investigation by historians, scientists, and military analysts trying to understand how such an extraordinary survival feat had been possible. But for Admiral Harrison and the expedition team, the successful rescue represented the culmination of an investigation that had begun with a single dedicated communications officer following up on unusual radio signals. The discovery and rescue of USS Phoenix would have profound implications for maritime safety, military survival training, and scientific understanding of human endurance. However, the most immediate impact was the return of 37 American sailors who had been given up for lost more than 7 decades earlier. Their homecoming would mark the beginning of a new chapter in their extraordinary story, as they faced the challenge of adapting to life in the 21st century after their incredible journey through time beneath the Pacific Ocean. The return of the USS Phoenix survivors to Pearl Harbor on May 3, 2019, marked the beginning of what would prove to be an even more challenging journey than their decades of survival beneath the Pacific Ocean. The 37 men who had maintained 1940s military discipline and routines for 76 years suddenly found themselves thrust into a world that had been transformed by technological, social, and political changes beyond their comprehension. Admiral Harrison had anticipated that the survivors' reintegration would be complex, but nothing in his military experience had prepared him for the scope of the challenges that lay ahead. The Navy's standard procedures for rescued personnel assumed weeks or months of isolation, not decades of complete separation from the modern world. The Phoenix survivors represented a unique situation that required entirely new approaches to medical care, psychological support, and administrative processing. The first priority was comprehensive medical evaluation of all 37 survivors. Dr. Margaret Foster, the chief medical officer at Pearl Harbor Naval Medical Center, assembled a team of specialists to examine the men and determine their physical condition after their extraordinary ordeal. The results of these examinations would provide some of the most intriguing scientific data to emerge from the entire Phoenix incident. The medical findings confirmed what the expedition team had observed during the rescue operation. While the survivors showed signs of malnutrition and the physical effects of prolonged isolation, their overall health was remarkable considering their circumstances. Most puzzling was their apparent rate of aging, which seemed to have slowed significantly during their time in the underwater cavern. Captain Sterling, who according to naval records had been born in 1918, appeared to have the physical characteristics of a man 30 years younger than his chronological age. Blood tests revealed unusual mineral concentrations and other biochemical markers that suggested extended exposure to the unique environmental conditions within the cavern. Dr. Foster's team hypothesized that the combination of reduced radiation exposure, stable atmospheric pressure, and consumption of mineral-rich spring water might have contributed to the survivors' remarkable physical preservation. While the medical examinations continued, Admiral Harrison faced the enormous administrative challenge of processing the return of men who had been officially declared dead decades earlier. The survivors' military records had been closed, their families had received death benefits, and their legal existence had been terminated by military and civilian authorities. Restoring their official status would require unprecedented cooperation between military, legal, and governmental agencies. The psychological evaluation of the survivors revealed another set of remarkable findings. Despite their extended isolation and the extreme stress of their survival situation, the men showed remarkably few signs of the mental health problems that would normally be expected from such an ordeal. Military psychologists attributed this resilience to the crew's maintenance of military structure and discipline throughout their isolation. Captain Sterling had continued to function as the ship's commanding officer, maintaining duty rosters, conducting training exercises, and preserving the chain of command that had given his men purpose and structure during their ordeal. This military framework had apparently provided the psychological stability that had enabled the crew to survive not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. However, the survivors' adjustment to modern life presented challenges that no amount of military discipline could address. The world they returned to in 2019 was vastly different from the one they had left in 1943. The Cold War had come and gone. The computer age had transformed society, and social attitudes had evolved in ways that the Phoenix crew found difficult to comprehend. Captain Mitchell, who had played such a crucial role in their discovery and rescue, was assigned to help coordinate the survivors' orientation to modern life. Her first challenge was explaining basic technological developments that had occurred during their absence. The men who had survived for decades using improvised equipment and manual labor found themselves confronted with smartphones, computers, and digital communication systems that seemed like science fiction. The cultural adjustments were even more challenging than the technological ones. The survivors had maintained 1940 social attitudes and behaviors throughout their isolation, and they struggled to understand the changes in military organization, social relationships, and cultural norms that had taken place during their absence. Women serving in combat roles, racial integration of the military, and changes in military protocol were particularly difficult concepts for them to accept. Media attention surrounding the Phoenix survivors created additional complications for their reintegration process. News of their rescue had quickly spread beyond military channels, and the story captured public imagination in ways that Admiral Harrison hadn't anticipated. The survivors found themselves the subjects of intense media scrutiny and public fascination that added stress to an already overwhelming situation. The Navy's response was to limit media access while providing carefully controlled information about the survivors and their rescue. The full details of their survival story were classified pending completion of official investigations, but enough information was released to satisfy public curiosity and prevent harmful speculation about the circumstances of their discovery. Family reunification presented some of the most emotionally challenging aspects of the survivors' return. Most of the men had been married when USS Phoenix disappeared, and many had children who are now elderly adults. The decades of separation had created family situations that required delicate handling and extensive counseling support. Petty Officer James Rodriguez, who had been 22 years old when the ship disappeared, found himself reuniting with a son who was now 78 years old and great-grandchildren who were older than he appeared to be. The emotional impact of these reunions was profound for both the survivors and their families, requiring extensive psychological support and counseling services. Some families had maintained hope for decades that their loved ones might still be alive, while others had long ago accepted their loss and moved forward with their lives. The sudden return of men who had been presumed dead for 76 years reopened old wounds and created new emotional challenges for everyone involved. The survivors also faced practical challenges related to their legal and financial status. Their military pay had stopped in 1943, their bank accounts had been closed, and their personal property had been distributed to heirs decades earlier. The Navy worked with various government agencies to develop procedures for restoring the survivors' legal existence and providing them with the resources they needed to rebuild their lives. 6 months after their rescue, the Phoenix survivors had made remarkable progress in adapting to modern life. But the process was far from complete. Captain Sterling, despite his advanced chronological age, had emerged as a leader in helping his men navigate their new circumstances. His decades of command experience in the underwater refuge proved invaluable in organizing the survivors' collective response to the challenges of reintegration. The scientific investigation of the survivors' extraordinary preservation continued throughout their reintegration process. Researchers from multiple disciplines studied everything from their blood chemistry to their psychological profiles, hoping to understand the mechanisms that had enabled their remarkable survival. The findings would eventually contribute to advances in life extension research, survival medicine, and understanding of human adaptation to extreme environments. Dr. Rodriguez continued her archaeological investigation of USS Phoenix, which remained in its underwater cavern as a protected historical site. The ship had been designated as a naval monument, and plans were developed for its eventual recovery and display as a museum dedicated to naval survival and ingenuity. The vessel's conversion into an underwater survival habitat represented one of the most remarkable examples of human adaptability in maritime history. The Phoenix incident also led to significant changes in naval search and rescue procedures, communication protocols, and survival training. Captain Mitchell's dedication to investigating unusual radio transmissions became a model for communications personnel throughout the Navy, and her discovery techniques were incorporated into standard training programs. Admiral Harrison, reflecting on the entire Phoenix operation from his office at Pearl Harbor, considered it the most extraordinary experience of his naval career. The successful rescue of the 37 survivors had required coordination between multiple military services, civilian researchers, and government agencies on a scale that had never before been attempted for a maritime rescue operation. The story of USS Phoenix and its remarkable crew became a testament to the power of military discipline, human ingenuity, and the refusal to give up hope even in the most impossible circumstances. The survivors' ability to maintain their military identity and continue following their duty for more than 7 decades underground became an inspiration for military personnel around the world. As the first anniversary of their rescue approached, the Phoenix survivors had largely adapted to life in the 21st century. Many had chosen to remain near Pearl Harbor, where they could maintain contact with each other and continue their association with the naval community that had been such an important part of their identity. Their story continued to fascinate researchers and historians, but for the survivors themselves, the most important achievement was simply coming home after the longest patrol in naval history. Captain Sterling, in his first public interview 1 year after the rescue, summarized the experience with the straightforward professionalism that had characterized his leadership throughout the ordeal. "We were sailors doing our duty, and our duty was to survive and return to service. It took longer than we expected, but we never stopped believing that the Navy would find us and bring us home." The discovery and rescue of USS Phoenix proved that sometimes the most extraordinary stories are true, and that the combination of human determination, military discipline, and never giving up hope can overcome even the most impossible circumstances. The survivors' journey from 1943 to 2019 represented not just an incredible survival story, but a bridge between different eras of naval history and a reminder that the values of duty, honor, and perseverance remain constant across the decades. Their story became a permanent part of naval tradition, inspiring future generations of sailors and serving as proof that no mission is truly impossible when faced with courage, ingenuity, and an unwavering commitment to bringing everyone home.